With us, Tim Martin, Wall Street Journal. Michelle Lee, Washington Post, perfectly positioned to cover all the action and unpack it for our viewers here in DC and around the world. Next on the Capital Cable. All right, good evening to those of you in Korea. Good day to those of you in Washington, D.C. Good, I guess, morning to you around the rest of the world. I think I messed up the intro, mainly because I'm so excited about the opening of KBO. I've got KBO on the brain. I've got my Doosan Bears mug here. We are locked and loaded for a great KBO season. And, well, there's a small political issue in Korea, of course, which we're deadly serious about and focused on. And that is the focus of the Capital Cable 109th edition today. Impeachment, all of its machinations, and with us to analyze, unpack, report, we have two of the best journalists, not just in Asia, but around the world. We have Tim Martin of the Wall Street Journal. And I'm introducing you first, Tim, because I think I went with Michelle first last time. So kind of, I'm toggling back and forth, equal time, as they say. Of course, everybody knows Tim, a longtime Wall Street Journal correspondent, outstanding reporting from the region, and of course, a frequent visitor on the CSIS Capital Cable. Tim, welcome back to the show.
All right. Well, hopefully we can hit a home run today.
I like it. The baseball analogies are already flying. All right, excellent. Michelle, over to you. Just wanted to introduce you. Of course, Washington Post bureau chief out of Tokyo, I believe, but obviously her remit covers Seoul. She's back and forth quite a bit. Everybody knows Michelle from her long days at the Washington Post and fantastic reporting across an array of subjects, most notably a piece on KBO a couple years back in which yours truly was quoted, which I have, I think, framed on my wall. So, Michelle, welcome back to the show. We're here for, we're really excited that you're here for another edition of the Capital Cable.
Thanks for having me. I'm also excited for KBO season to start.
Oh, it's so great. It is just so great. All right. It's in the air. I'm trying not to get distracted, but it is, I wanted to go to opening day, just couldn't make it work. And I'm just like, angling to get over there. All right. With that, though, in between KBO games, we have a deadly serious topic. Victor is going to be a little late, by the way. That's not the serious topic, but he will be late. He's coming off the bench to pick up what Tim Martin was putting down on the baseball analogies on the on-deck circle. So let's get into it right away. And I'm going to go to Tim first. Tim, you were on a few weeks ago here, and just I think it's worth an update. I mean, let me just maybe give you a little bit of a kind of a setup here, which is we've now seen some interesting machinations recently, right? We have the court, the Constitutional Court, which people think is on the verge of a decision, number one. We also have some other judicial machinations or I guess decisions around a potential opposition candidate if Yoon Suk Yeol was removed from office and if there was a snap election. And we also have a return of an acting president, Han Duck-soo, that was impeached, but found basically acquitted by the court, or I'm not probably using the right term, but lots going on. Tim, can you please bring us up to speed on what's happening in Korea?
Yeah, lots of lawsuits, lots of action, and actually probably a bit too much inaction if you talk to people who do not like President Yoon. So just in the past week or so, on Monday, we saw impeached Prime Minister Han Duck-soo be reinstated. So he, like President Yoon, was impeached in December, and the judges ruled that he should not be impeached. They struck that down, and he was back as acting president. So here we have the third switch up in acting in the presidency since martial law declaration. A few days later, Lee Jae-myung, as you mentioned, the opposition leader and presumed frontrunner for any type of snap election, he won an important legal and political victory when an appeals court refused to uphold a lower court decision of guilty. So they cleared him of all charges, and in the context of a potential race that could be around the corner, this in effect unshackled him. There was risk to Lee because even if he still had his judicial process left, so even if he was found guilty on Wednesday, there was still a Supreme Court decision. But I think polling suggested that people would judge Lee if he were guilty again. So even though so if he were actually declared guilty at the Supreme Court in some hypothetical scenario, he could be eliminated from running from office for 10 years. He would lose his legislative seat. So that doomsday scenario, if you're on the political left here, was removed. And it's really given momentum to Lee and his potential candidacy in the days and weeks ahead. And the inaction part here is what happens with President Yoon. And that's the big decision that will kick off everything. We've been hearing for weeks that a decision from the Constitutional Court is around the corner. It's imminent within days. And it looks like it's stretching into next week, possibly even longer. And what are we waiting for? The Constitutional Court plays a similar role as the U.S. Senate. So back in December, President Yoon was impeached by the National Assembly by 2/3 vote. And then the Constitutional Court reviews that decision, judges it on its constitutional merits. And this has taken longer than any other impeachment case in South Korean modern history. So we're waiting. And for President Yoon, he's got two options here. He's either going to be reinstated as president or the impeachment will be upheld. If that's the case, snap election is called within 60 days. And we're still waiting. There are 8 judges currently on that court. 6 of them have to back the impeachment, uphold the impeachment. Otherwise, Yoon is back.
All right, outstanding, Leon. Let me come back with a follow-up here. Should we? Obviously, let me start over. Obviously, it's a big decision to overturn an election. So I don't want to make light or necessarily say, well, the court is dragging its feet or there's lack of progress. On the other hand, a lot of experts thought that the court would be out with a decision by now. Frankly, people were predicting mid-March. Should we be reading into anything? Number one. And number two, why the delay, if there is one? Is it a split among the jurists? Is it that Yoon Suk Yeol mounted an effective defense? Is it popular opinion? Which obviously I think that, I mean, not obviously, but I've heard the court is to take that into account. So could you help us unpack that a little bit, Tim?
The court itself is saying very little about why there are delays. And I think we won't find out until the verdict is delivered. But there's lots of speculation around why is this taking longer than we expected.
Out that court? I'm joking. I'm just, you've got to penetrate. Maybe the Post does. I'm joking. So.
We'll have to get Michelle's thoughts on this as well. But I think a couple of unexpected developments, and you're right, the court on some level, sort of unofficially, but sort of in practice, does factor in public sentiment. And a couple of unexpected things have happened. One, and there's some stuff going forward as well, but Yoon, who had been detained, was released several weeks ago. And that sort of gave additional momentum to his supporters and also injected this potential for violence, for civil unrest. And right around that mid-March period when we were expecting a quick verdict, that was when Yoon was released. So I think that was one pressure point. And then I think, everyone knew that this decision around Lee Jae-myung in this appeals court was happening on Wednesday. That was a known date. And I think the court sort of wanted to see what might happen with that verdict, because the courts, I think, here do have a legacy of having sensitivity, of getting involved in politics, of affecting the nature of the political discourse. And I think without knowing is Lee Jae-myung going to be in the race or not, that could have been a complicating factor for the court. I think they wanted to see what his decision would be. And I think going forward, there's going to be pressure because 2 of the left-leaning judges are set to retire here in a matter of weeks. So I think we've got, we've had some important events we knew about. We had some that we did not expect, and then now we've got something ahead that puts an unofficial shot clock for something like this to come together. Now, I think the last time we had an impeachment was a decision was back in 2017. It was a unanimous vote. I think many analysts think that's an aspiration this time around, and given how politically divided and volatile the situation here is on the ground in Seoul, I think there are many people who would like to see some type of uniform, pronouncement about what happened to Yoon, what happens to Yoon. Otherwise, it sort of cracks open the door to further dissent, further anger from either side. And I think those are all variables that are being calibrated, but that's from the outside looking in. I think only the judges themselves can speak to this, and we'll have to see what they have to say when verdict day does get here.
All right, outstanding, Tim. Last question, then I want to bring it over to Michelle. Just a point of clarification, and then 2 points of clarification. One is on the terms, right? That this is not like the U.S. courts with lifetime appointments. The justices rotate off right after terms, right? So hence the rotation, hence a sense of urgency. The other thing that happens in the terms, if I'm correct, is you start to run into issues about a quorum, correct? And if you get too many jurists that leave the bench too. So there's both left-leaning decision, but also quorum issues. So there is a sense of urgency. The other thing I'll just say about popular opinion is that I had a constitutional law professor at Stanford who talked about the U.S. courts. His theory was social change causes legal change, which reinforces social change. So there's always public opinion swirling, despite the protestations of jurists that they live in vacuums, within the world of physics. So I'll say there. The last thing I wanted to just bring up is there's now a separate legal proceeding against Yoon Suk Yeol, right, by a new prosecutorial office. Could you just take us through that, and then over to Michelle?
Yeah, if it's what I think you're referring to, yes, Yoon is actually concurrently but separately being investigated. He stands a criminal trial as well related to martial law. Presidential immunity covers a lot. It does not cover insurrection. So he's facing charges there. That trial is unfolding. That's why he was detained related to the criminal charges. And a lot of this is a numbers game. To jump back just quickly to the Constitutional Court, it's supposed to have 9 judges. Only 8 of them are there currently. So if we do the math, I think they need at least 6 to have a quorum. And if there are 2 set to retire soon, well, 2 just joined. That's why Han Duck-soo, the Prime Minister, was impeached in December. He refused to appoint 2 of those judges to get to 8. So, it's just a huge numbers game. And I would say, even stepping back further, that was, when you hear, why is this criminal trial that you mentioned, Mark, unfolding concurrently? This did not happen with Park Geun-hye in 2017. They waited for her to be ousted, then started the criminal trial. But I think when you talk to Yoon supporters, they'll point out that there is a time clock, there is a rush on the political left here, because Lee Jae-myung not only has the case we just talked about on Wednesday, he's got 4 other trials that are happening. And if any of them were to strike him down, he can't run in the next race or run in this snap election. So there was this sort of, at least by the ruling party, there was a view that the Democratic Party here, the opposition, really wanted to move on the fastest timeline possible to retain their leader's ability to run in any type of snap election.
All right, outstanding. And all of this, interestingly enough, these different legal machinations play into popular opinion, thoughts of overreach, anyway, so we'll get into that in a second, but very interesting. Thanks, Tim. Michelle, well worth the wait. Sorry, you're our number 4 hitter. We loaded the bases for you, and Tim saw a lot of pitches, drew a lot of walks. We now have the bases loaded. Apologies for the delay, but sometimes, it takes a while to get your big hitter up. So Michelle, over to you, your thoughts here on what's happening, number one, in the legal arena. And then if you wouldn't mind, take us a little bit through what might happen if there is a snap election. What's popular opinion showing between the parties? What's happening there on the political front as well? Michelle, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Wait, does that mean this is set up to be a grand slam, if I'm getting my terminology correct?
Exactly.
Great, okay. My dad has taught me baseball.
But you have to be careful because Jung Soo Bin is out there lurking in center field. He may rob you of a home run. So anyway, so there you go.
So I wanted to add to this issue of, what the court may be considering. Obviously, all of us would love to be a fly on the wall there. They've debugged the whole place every single time that the justices meet. And it's interesting that we keep calling it a delay because technically the court has up to 180 days to make this ruling, and it's only been like 104 days, although it feels like forever. So we've been setting this arbitrary deadline as media based on the precedent of the past two impeachment cases, but this is so different that I think we should stop comparing it to the other two cases and just kind of go along for the ride and hope that it'll come down eventually. I wanted to add that, I think it's really interesting when you parse through the justice's ruling on the Han Duck-soo case. If you kind of consider it as somewhat of a litmus test for what they may be considering in the Yoon case, it's really interesting because they had 5 allegations that they were considering for Han, including whether Han had colluded with President Yoon to declare martial law, and then there was the issue of appointing justices. But you can tell that the justices are very intentional on what is a clear violation of Constitution and what is not. And even if there is a clear violation of the Constitution, which they did find in one of the allegations with Han, they still ruled that it wasn't enough to remove him from office because the threshold for removal is high. And you can tell this when you go through the rulings because they really talk about the allegations and how each of the allegations, what the domestic political situation was for each of them, what the political environment was, what the duty of the acting president was versus duty of the prime minister was when when the allegation was made, and what Han said publicly and whether that comports with his actions, and whether the actions of Han was a detriment to the democratic principles. And so if you think about how the justices are thinking through it, and also there was no unanimous decision on the Han case, you can see many clear differences between the 8 justices and how they ruled each of the allegations. And if they came to like such careful deliberations on the 5 allegations for Han, I could only imagine what they must be going through with Yoon. And so I think it's clear that the bar is there some evidence of corruption, abuse of power, deterioration of democratic norms and institutions, and in that case, then they would consider it to meet the threshold of removal. So I've been really interested in just kind of putting myself in their shoes and thinking like how they've been reviewing the Han case and what that could tell us about the Yoon case. Moving forward to the election.
And Michelle, just one follow-up there. This is getting a little deep into the legal realm, but I think it bears asking, what do the justices rely on for precedent in a case like this? Is it other impeachments of lower ranking officials? Is it the past president impeachment procedures? Both or none of the above, or kind of a mix?
The DP has been like 0 for 30 in their impeachment efforts of all these officials. And I think some of the cases have been taken together by the court, but I think that the court has been fairly ruling on them independently, like kind of trying to view each case on its own. Some of the impeachment cases have been bundled up because of the way that the DP brought it to the courts. But if you sort of look through the Han case, it doesn't really use the other officials or previous presidential impeachments as a standard. So I think, I'm not a legal expert, but I think if I haven't seen any trend that they're kind of using, the Park Geun-hye impeachment or a different impeachment as a legal standard. And so, yeah, in terms of the election that it might be coming up, the snap election, like Tim mentioned, Lee Jae-myung is looking like the, front runner here, especially now that the court has really cleared the way for his candidacy. Even if the prosecutors take this up to the Supreme Court, it's going to be a pretty tight deadline for the court to rule within, maybe 2 months on that case. there could be a campaign that happens between then. And it was always going to be a tight deadline. But now that the momentum is behind Lee, I think it's pretty clear that he has cleared the primary field. I mean, just as of last week, when it was really looking iffy whether the case was whether he was going to be acquitted or not, there were all these Democratic lawmakers talking about how the bench is pretty thin and they need new candidates, and who is going to actually run if Lee is unable to run for office, or if the public sentiment turns so against him that it's politically unviable for him to run for office, then who is next in line? And it wasn't really clear. But now I think he's pretty solidified as the head of the party. You're seeing the rest of the party leaders line up behind him. He's really doing these very presidential visits to the wildfires right now, which are raging through Andong, which is his hometown. So it's a good opportunity for him to sort of step up in this leadership vacuum to show that sort of public-facing leadership during a time of disaster. So he's definitely, at least, I think as of last week, he's at like 36%, by far the highest rating polling candidate who is expected to run in this race. The rest of the candidates on the who are on the conservative side, the PPP side, are polling at like single digits. The highest single digit polling is Kim Moon-soo, the labor minister, and a conservative lawmaker who's at 9%. Han Dong-un, who was the PPP head, and Oh Se-hoon, 3%. So the gap between the front runner on the PPP side and Lee Jae-myung is quite big. At the same time, I think you can't take Lee's victory for granted, and the DP knows that. Lee Jae-myung knows that, and that's why you're seeing him sort of do what the South Koreans are calling right-clicking.
Right, it's a pretty divided country with not a whole lot of independent voters. So 36% is impressive, but it's still a long way. Tell me if I'm right or wrong, from 50+1. Right, in the structure of the current Korean electorate. Full stop there. Michelle, over to you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to consider how a lot of Lee's public support was because he was pitted against Yoon. People in the 22 election, it's remarkable how close it was, but it was really an election of two unlikable candidates. And it wasn't necessarily because people loved Yoon or loved Lee, it was because they hated the other candidate. So it was kind of like a hate vote. And so then now the question is, does Lee have a strong enough base of his own to actually carry him over to a clear victory when he doesn't have this foil of another unlikable candidate of Yoon, of people picking Lee because they don't want to pick Yoon. Given that dynamic of the 22 race, I think he is slightly more politically vulnerable this time, just because he's had to grow his base since then. But actually, the electorate has been as politically divided, as you mentioned, as it was in 22. And right now, things really feel a little bit like it feels a little precarious here in Seoul. I'm sure Tim feels it too, but you're seeing these protests every single day. You're really seeing the greatest hits of protest tactics of shaving heads, starving themselves. And so I think in this highly politicized environment, it is going to be a little hard for Lee to win over whoever might be left in the middle, at the same time expanding his base. I think it'll be quite challenging for him too.
Yeah, fascinating stuff on kind of the electorate analysis there. And, as you all know, because I saw you both, I was just in Seoul a few weeks ago, and it was, I concur with the precarious categorization, or the tense, the tension you could feel was palpable, and I think it's likely only grown since I was there, largely because of my problematic behavior throughout the country. Just kidding. When I was there, anyway. Tim, back to you. Let me ask this. Let me bring the alliance into it quickly here. We've seen in Canada, for example, President Trump's actions play a big role in the election that's forthcoming, right? The Canadians are going to have an election right about the same time as the Koreans do, if the court rules a certain way. And what has been so noticeable has been the Liberal Party down 30 points, 20, 30 points, all of a sudden slight lead, right? Or dead even at least. So very interesting there. And you look at what's over the horizons for the Korea, you see auto tariffs likely out today, big impact, right? Reciprocal tariffs, potentially big impact, not just for Korea, but for other countries where Korean companies do manufacturing and use their supply chain to import or export rather to the United States. And then obviously you've got all the military issues with alliance, mutual self-defense issues, burden sharing, which you've already seen the Trump team make a lot of noise around in NATO, to a lesser extent, some in Japan. We'll see what comes out of the Secretary Hegseth visit. So what to make of all of this, these alliance issues in the current political environment in Seoul? Tim, the floor is yours.
Well, they're certainly dominating local news in terms of the Trump tariffs, and we just saw additional ones put on vehicles today, or just in the last day or so. I think certainly America will play a role in this hypothetical snap election. I think the question to sort of parse through is, who does it benefit? Now, I think if you talk to people in Washington, they'll recall quite fondly, but to a certain point, President Yoon's posture toward Washington. It was a very tight relationship. President Yoon went to the White House, sang American Pie, fortified relations with Tokyo, led to the Camp David summit, sort of unprecedented trilateral coordination between the three. So you'd think that would be the America camp. But if we're seeing the U.S. more and more as an aggressor, that might play into the hands of the opposition party, which, tends to drape itself more domestically, more inward looking. And I think, Lee Jae-myung, in terms of a practical matter, there's sort of two things. It's like, how should the U.S. think about this? How will South Korean voters think about this? So I take this from the voters' perspective first. I mean, Lee Jae-myung is a very tactical, skilled retail politician. If Trump is making headlines and, really angering the public here, he'll know how to play those notes, especially during an election season. I think from the U.S. perspective, I think Lee Jae-myung, he certainly evolved. At one point, when he was a provincial governor, he said he wanted to be Bernie Sanders, but successful. And now both Michelle and I have recently interviewed him. He certainly is the right click, as they call it here. He's even tried to call himself as a conservative, right? In sort of a global standard, he would actually be a textbook conservative. And I think he's got enough pragmatism, and you can see this in sort of how he's behaving now. He's making a lot of overtures to different government embassies. I think last week he just sat down with Ye Hee Lee of Samsung, and that follows other meetings with conglomerate heads. So I think he's trying to show that, the perception of him might be quite radicalized, but he's really, willing to balance with the U.S., willing to work with business partners. I mean, even just meeting Ye Hee Lee was very controversial because a big part of his loyal base comes from labor unions. And, that's been a point of tension in the past. So I think, America, has its cards to play if it wants, vis-a-vis any type of South Korean election. We're already getting a lot of pain here in Seoul in terms of the tariffs. But I think as a practical matter, it'll be very interesting to see who seizes this. Is it sort of, Korea needs a protector, needs a strong leader to stand up for Korean interests, or does somehow the conversation shift to, we need someone who can work with Trump, we need someone who understands America? That could be a different conversation. And I think the elephant in the room here, Michelle did a great job running through the hypothetical candidates. Yes, Lee is, as I've said before, is the most popular politician in Korea, is also the most unpopular. And I think when we look at any type of hypothetical race, we have to know who he's running against. Michelle mentioned 2022 was the race of unlikables. Well, we could be back to that, but we don't know who is running from the conservatives yet. We don't know if they're likable or unlikable. So I think there are a lot of question marks here to fill in. But certainly the U.S., I think, will be one of the issues that people are thinking about.
All right, outstanding, Tim. Thanks. Oh, Michelle, over to you. Let me posit a question that Tim teed up a bit in his intervention in terms of where is it likely the mood of the Korean people will settle out in terms of the U.S., right? And have this, you could argue, more than marginal impact on the election, which in a tight election could be one of the deciding factors, right? If you're down to tiny margins, right? Are the Koreans likely to get more in a confrontational mode? I would argue, like the Canadians, right? Or is it going to be kind of engage, work with the president, perhaps projecting strength at the same time? And is that perhaps like the Mexicans, you could also argue, right, have done that track? You see it here in North America, two different approaches which impact electoral politics, right? You see the confrontational approach propel the Canadian left. You've also seen the Mexican approach propel the current incumbent, right? She's at, I think I saw one poll at 80% approval right now. So what might happen with all of this dynamic, and where might this settle out? What are you looking for here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to read the mood of a population, but here's how I think about it. First, we know that public polling has shown us that the public has leaned more favorable toward Yoon's foreign policy of engagement with the US, given the current environment of China's aggression, North Korea sending troops to Russia. Like, there is a broader and also a move away from the anti-Japanese sentiments, and the young people especially being more friendly toward the Japanese. And so if you take all of that into account, the public has been broadly supportive of Yoon's foreign policy in that way. And that's why you're seeing Lee Jae-myung take this more centrist approach, because he knows that at least on foreign policy, the public winds have shifted to the point where DP seems very extreme in its traditional stance, especially on Japan and criticizing the US. So we know that about the public polling. And I would say, in conversations with government officials, politicians in certainly recent weeks, we've seen this specifically during the sensitive country designation by DOE, the kind of abject confusion around what happened, what it means about US perception of South Korea, what can South Korea do, how should South Korea be interpreting this, responding to this. It was quite chaotic in a way that I don't think it would have been if there were a clear head of state, clear government administration that was strong and in a strong footing. And that was very telling to me in sort of this very unstable, haphazard moment that we're in South Korea, that has, I think, kind of led to a lack of confidence when it comes to how South Korea should be dealing with the US right now. And you're seeing this also reflected in the way, for example, Hyundai just announced that they're going to invest $21 billion in the US. Some people who are watching this have called it a capitulation to the United States rather than standing up like some other countries have been. I just think that generally the way that the government is sort of handling alliance matters at the moment is sort of on a lesser footing than it would have been if it weren't going through all of this. And so if the US, and on top of that, what we're seeing from Trump right now isn't really unexpected, right? We've seen tariff wars before. We've seen SMA negotiations before. We've seen him negotiate with Kim Jong-un, which South Koreans are also concerned about. The playbook so far is predictable from, an ally standpoint compared to Trump 1. Trump 2 so far is not super different from South Korean perspective. So I think given all of this, I don't think that anti-US sentiment will be a huge factor in the election. But then again, dynamic Korea, things change so quickly. Who knows? I may be eating my words tomorrow. But I just think that because of this very frail environment in the South Korean government, you're not seeing this moment being weaponized, or at least seeing a strong defense being put up by South Korea, like you're seeing from other allies who are pushing back with retaliatory tariffs.
All right, outstanding. Really, really helpful analysis there. And just one go back on the DP foreign policy. One could argue that there's traditional DP foreign policy, but there's also centrists within the ranks, like Lee Sung-lak, who's been on this program, for example, who's very much regarded as a centrist voice. And it'll be interesting to see which faction prevails, right? Both during the campaign and if the DP comes back into power, how they govern, right? So really interesting stuff there, in addition to your excellent comments about the predictability.
When I interviewed him about his foreign policy, I asked him, you've called your foreign policy pragmatic. How does that differ from, for example, Moon Jae-in's foreign policy, or what we understand to be the traditional Democratic Party foreign policy stance? And he said that it's not too different.
I got you. Very interesting. Now, Michelle, it reminds me never to be interviewed by you because the questions are too hard. So I'm joking. No, that's excellent. And let me ask one other thing then quickly on this, and then we'll Victor's here just to have him kind of close it out. Do you see within the DP, because you have the same standard bearer running in 2022, now he's moving to the right, mindful of Tim's comments that there's a lot of unfavorable sentiment about him. Do you see within the DP a recognition of this and an attempt to amend longstanding policy positions, or do you see this more as an effort to straddle the line politically to get votes in order to return to power and effectuate, their more traditional agenda?
You mean the more central approach?
No, they're I guess more traditional, more left of center. They're longstanding because it's still the kind of the 386 generation in charge of the DP, right? It's still, despite some of the younger folks coming up the ranks. How do you see this playing out? Do you see an actual tack, or do you see more of a traditional approach if they actually govern, or just too hard to tell at this point?
The DP has become such a big umbrella at this point. So many of the smaller factional parties that have been combined under the DP umbrella. But, you kind of see the political tactics lately. They tried to impeach Choi Sang-mok, the acting president, acting president, on Friday. And that was despite pushback from other parts of the party saying, look, there's impeachment fatigue in the public. We really shouldn't be doing this. But the leadership, the more traditional DP folks, went forward with it anyway. And I think that's sort of tells you that the mindset of, perhaps win at all costs is still very deeply rooted.
Right. Very interesting. I mean, I just, this is a longer conversation, but it's a fascinating topic. You could also point back to the original articles of impeachment, right? Where there was anti-Japan sentiment or anti-Japan language in the original articles. And then you have some recent favorable comments towards Japan, right? Softening. So it's a very interesting, I think, ideological, and you could argue generational battle within the party that will play out here in the coming months. I think underscored or brought to the fore by the presidential election. All right, excellent stuff. Victor, we're at 9:12, or I'm sorry, 10:12 here on the East Coast. Apologies. It's like we've been using baseball analogies. It's like I would say the 8th or 9th inning. You're the closer. You're warmed up. You're off the bullpen. You're out of the bullpen. You've taken your 8 pitches, your 2 minutes, whatever it is these days. What's going on, Victor? Comments on the episode?
Great. No, really a terrific episode. Really quite interesting. I mean, as I was listening, I was texting people, say, are you watching this? This looks like an excellent episode. But
were you talking about the moderator or just the panelists only? Oh, all right. Anyways, all right.
So just a couple of quick things. The first is Michelle was saying she'd love to be a fly on the wall in that constitutional court. So I will tell you that I have information about what they talked about in the constitutional court, because I was inadvertently are having. Nobody knows that there's one, but they, VC is a very common Korean name, so they brought that in. But seriously, I don't think this political crisis that both of them describe, these demonstrations in the street, none of this is going to get resolved unless there's an election. I mean, I don't really see any other way. If Yoon is reinstated, I mean, if Yoon is reinstated, if the court makes a decision, he's reinstated, it's just going to be, the crisis is just going to get worse. I mean, there will be demonstrations on the street. All the political energy will go into blocking Yoon as much as they could on the budget, right? On demonstrations in the National Assembly. It's just going to be horrible, right? And the party, the PPP, they're going to see him as damaged goods. They're going to be preparing for the next election. So I think he's going to be a lame duck even if he's brought back into office. The second point I'll make is that I agree, like the numbers for the PPP are really low, but we have to really wait until when they have a candidate, then we'll really see, like we said, is the anti-Lee vote worse than the anti-whoever PPP vote or vice versa, So then we'll really get a sense of the numbers. And then the last thing I'll say is, and you guys laid it out at the very end, there is a quiet crisis in the U.S.-Korea alliance right now. Nobody's really talking about it or anything, but if you look at like the DOE listing, the absence of any sort of high-level contact, the tariffs, Hegseth is skipping Korea, Bridge Colby is going to be Undersecretary for Policy at DOD, and there'll almost certainly be a press on Korea to move to strategic flexibility. SMA, North Korea, like there is a quiet crisis in the alliance that nobody is really talking about. But the main part we're seeing of it right now are the tariffs, as Tim was saying. So I think these two wonderful journalists should start writing about that.
All right, with that, well, and Victor, just two go backs. One, also, I think the other thing, in addition to the actual impacts within U.S. ROK, you put your finger on a little bit. Let me just draw it out. The Koreans are looking around at the rest of the world, right, and drawing those lessons in straight line back to them and other equities. And then the other point on your anti-Lee, anti-PPP vote, then I think what's interesting and what we were exploring is how do these other X factors that are more than marginal come in, right? For example, the U.S. alliance, how does it handling that becomes an issue, right? These smaller, I would say, not smaller, but you would sort of say secondary issues that are traditionally in Korean elections that are important, but not all of a sudden take on a greater salience, which I think is perhaps very interesting. All right, with that, we are out of time. Gavel down. Michelle, thank you. Outstanding. Thanks for staying up late with us. We really appreciate it. Tim, as always, great work on your end as well. We really appreciate your time and attention and insights. Thanks to both panelists. Outstanding, excellent. We have to have you back. Victor, we've got to figure out how to get to a KBO game with them too, because they're both big fans. And with that, I'm just going to say KBO season's well underway. I've got my Doosan Bears. Last time they won autograph baseball, 2019. So I feel like this is the year we're coming back with Doosan. So anyway, with that, everybody tune into a KBO game who can, and keep watching this show because things are unfolding very, very rapidly. And we really appreciate the insights here. We're going to have them back. All right, with that, show over, gavel down. Thanks, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.